Well, we'd like to welcome you today for joining our webinar titled Start Gaining Insight and Draw Analytics from Your Unstructured Data in Less Than an Hour. We're all very excited to have you on the call with us today. We have quite a crowd, so we're looking forward to getting started here. And we're going to be diving in and talking about how you can very quickly implement and deploy the Doxonomy solution in literally less than an hour, how you can get it up and running and analyzing data and drawing results from that data. And we're going to take a look at that in a couple of different ways. If you have any questions during the webinar, while everybody is muted, you will be able to post those by clicking on the Q&A button in the webinar menu bar. So feel free to ask questions. We'll try to answer those questions within the webinar. If we don't get to them or answer them on the webinar, we will respond to them via email directly back to you and get answers, and we'll share that question and the answers with all those that are in attendance. So that being said, let's go ahead and dive right in and get started. So my name's Brian Reynolds. I am the CEO and founder of Doxonomy, and so I'll be taking us through this journey today. I just give you a little background on myself. I have been in the technology industry, for quite some time, coming up on 30 years now that I've been doing this. I used to own a software consulting company before, started back in 2000. Ran that business for 13 years. We grew it to about 50 consultants, and then we sold that to EMC. Since then, since we made that sale of the business, I continued on with EMC for about 3 years, running that practice for them globally. So that being said, I've been involved with and working on hundreds of implementations for large enterprise companies like all of those that are in attendance today, and just have a vast amount of knowledge around this space. We, from a background perspective, spent many years doing this, very focused on unstructured data management, the ability to deal with repositories like Documentum or SharePoint or FileNet, tools like that, and doing integrations, implementations, and deployments of those for many different industries, but in particular life sciences, a lot of background in the life sciences industry. So a lot of years of knowledge around this, and looking forward to kind of telling you about this new venture, or what we've been doing with Doxonomy for those that are in attendance today. So from a Doxonomy perspective, we got started with this solution after I left EMC a few years ago, about 3 years ago, and really saw a gap in the enterprise around unstructured content management, around Documentum, SharePoint, all these different tools that we worked with. We saw a gap when it came to search, and we really sort of just honed in on that and said, there's a real problem here. I mean, there's been enterprise search for many years. There's been a lot of people that have been trying to solve this problem, but we saw these tools as being cumbersome and expensive and hard to deploy and hard to use. It just really wasn't a great experience whatsoever. And we just kept seeing a repeat of that. And then when you look at the tools that we were integrating or working or deploying and putting together, we just saw a gap in search. It was always kind of an afterthought. It was really never thought out very well, and it wasn't very user friendly. And we just felt in this day and age where we're used to Googling everything and being able to gain access to everything and get instantaneous answers sort of in the public domain, why can't we do this with corporate data? And so we felt that we had to look at this problem in a very different way and come at it from a fresh perspective. We didn't want, to buy legacy software and try to implement that software and integrate it as we had in the past. We wanted to approach it with a fresh, new perspective. And that's what we did. So when you think about why we do what we do, why Doxonomy does what they do, it was all with the purpose of being able to search and analyze your unstructured and structured, both, not just unstructured, but definitely focusing on unstructured data, behind the company firewall and making it as easy as Googling the weather. We're so used to that, and we wanted to accomplish that and make that happen. And so that's what we set out to do. And we've leveraged machine learning and artificial intelligence and natural language processing, all these different components to make that happen. So when you think about intelligence and you think about the components that make up intelligence, to us, it's really important. You need a natural language processing engine, something that we've built into our platform. What does that mean? Well, we need to be able to interpret and read content with a machine like a human being would read it. We need to understand contextually what words mean, because the same word in one context could be very different in another context. We need to be able to interpret that. We need to be able to do that quickly and efficiently with the machine. We need to deal with sort of a plethora of different media types, right? Video, audio, images. All these things are exploding in this day and age in what we're creating. How do we analyze that type of data along with the traditional things like PDFs and Word documents, Office documents, things like that, emails and so forth? How do we analyze all of this data? And we need to be able to do it in a very deep and rich fashion. We need to crawl it and understand it and be able to understand the relationships of things as they exist within the content. On top of that, with that same sort of vein, after we understand it, we need to have a classification component in the engine that will allow us to sort out what files are what documents are what. Is this a contract? Is this an invoice? Is this a prescribing information document? And so on, right? What are these different classification types of documents? And then, more importantly, depending on the type of document it is, what entities or what meta information that we've learned through this NLP enrichment process are important. How do we raise that up to a level that can become indexable and understandable by a machine, by a database, by analytics or a BI tool? We also need to be able to incorporate a discovery component. So not everything's clear cut. You may be using, say, our life science solution and gaining immediate value, which is how you can get to that 1 hour time frame that we're talking about. But you also always have uniqueness within any organization. So you need to be able to program rules and make that configurable where you're not having to write code, but anybody, any user can add these rules and simply just say, okay, I want to look for this. And if I find it, I want to do this. And so you need to be able to build that in. You need to understand similarity. You need to understand basically what things are important. We get this all the time. For instance, in Amazon, when we buy something, it recommends other things that we might be interested in as we're looking at a particular item. Well, the same should be true from this data that we've analyzed, this unstructured data. We need to be able to recommend, hey, if you're looking at this document, these other documents are probably important as well. And so you want to be able to open up and view those. But more importantly, more granular, you want to be able to take that down to the sentence or to the statement level. I want to identify and find everywhere where this phrase was used across all the systems that I've crawled, and I want to be able to bring that back not as just an exact match, but also as 95% similarity, meaning that it's contextually almost the same. It may be written slightly different, but it's very close to the same. So you need to understand that. And then, of course, it wouldn't be a Google-like experience if we didn't have question and answer. If I ask a question, who, what, when, where, of the system, of the data, I want to be able to get answers back. I don't just want a result set that comes back, but I actually want to see answers coming back to me. And so these are the components of intelligence, and they're core to any system. What's important about this from a Doxonomy perspective is this is out of the box. This is built right into our platform, and you get it day one. Again, increasing the speed in which you can get deployed and up and running and gaining value. Now, when you think about all of this and you think about all of the different repositories that you have out there that you need to crawl and that you need to analyze and look at, this needs to be done in a very simplistic fashion, right? We don't want to have to write code to connect to every single repository that's out there. We want to be able to have pre-built configured crawlers that we can easily, as a user, go in, give it certain parameters of what it is that we're looking for, and then turn it on and let it run however we set it up to run. And it should be very simple and very easy. Now, from a doxonomy standpoint, what we've done is we've built in a crawler framework. We've pre-built mini crawlers already that are out of the box that you can consume and use today, just immediately. And they are designed in which you can set them up without needing to know any code whatsoever. And we're going to see that today. We're actually going to demonstrate just setting up a simple crawler and how quickly it takes and how much knowledge you need to have in order to do it. Very easy to do. But this is a key aspect of gaining that intelligence. We need to be able to point at these repositories and be able to crawl them quickly and bring back that insight into the system. So now let's switch gears a little bit here and let's talk about the deployment process and the effort that it takes to actually get the system deployed. Obviously, in this webinar, we're not going to go through the process of downloading the virtual appliance and all this kind of stuff. You know, there's steps here that would be pretty boring to watch on a webinar, but we're going to walk through the steps that it takes to do this. So the first step in the entire process would be to download the Doxonomy virtual appliance. Doxonomy ships as a virtual appliance. It's basically a wrapper of a virtual machine, a set of machines actually, and you would download those to the environment that you have chosen for your company. Could be on premise, could be a cloud solution or whatever, and that's really kind of the next step. So there is obviously a duration of time associated with the download, and that's bound to the bandwidth that you have in order to be able to download those files. But once you deploy those or drop those into the environment, whether you're going to use a cloud solution for your organization like Azure or Google Cloud or AWS, or if you're running on-prem using VMware or Hyper-V, you can basically put these into that location. And then the idea, once you've downloaded them, is you deploy them to the appropriate solution. So that process takes about 30 minutes. It's really moving of files and basic setup. Some of that time is, the configuration aspects of Azure or AWS or Google or VMware, however, there's certain components there, but on average, it takes about 30 minutes to get the appliance deployed. One of the longest pieces of the whole process. Once it's deployed and it's in place, the next step really is to just apply the license that you get from Doxonomy, and then literally configure the environment. There's some basic configuration aspects around what storage are you using and pointing it, and just they're literally drop downs and putting in some credentials and so forth. It's very simple and easy to do. It takes about 10 minutes to do that process. And then finally, you start it. You turn the thing on. And that's the beauty. It's not a install where you go through steps of an installation. It's pull down, drop into place, add your license, basic configuration, start appliance, and it runs. It's a virtual appliance. So the time to getting up and running, a literally running environment, is about 45 minutes of that hour. And that's where the most effort or the most work is done in getting your deployment process up and running. It doesn't require a project. It's not a complicated task. It's very well documented with steps on how to do it. It's pretty easy to get done. So 45 minutes, you've got a running environment ready to go. The second side of the deployment process is getting a crawler configured, getting an agent deployed, and letting it start crawling, the repository and gaining insight. Now, this has some variables to it. Depends on how many repositories you're crawling, how much data, and so forth. But simplistically, you can be up and running, pointing to a single repository very quickly. So the first step is to actually configure a crawler. That takes about 5 minutes or less. We're going to actually do this in the UI in just a second. We'll take a look at that. The next step is to create, download, and configure your agent. That's actually the little engine component that uses the information from the crawler to go and do the work, to start to go out and crawl the repository or repositories. It could be multiple. That takes about 5 minutes or less. We'll actually see that. We'll configure that. Finally, you turn it on and you let it run. Now you schedule these. They can run every minute, or they can run once a day, or it's totally configurable, and we'll see that when we configure one. But you turn it on and it starts to run, and as it runs, it begins to gather the data and analyze the results and bring those back into your index. So overall total time to insight based on those final facts is 60 minutes. So that's where we get this concept of, in an hour, give or take, you can be up and running with the platform, you can be crawling and indexing, and you can begin analyzing your results. So now that we've sort of framed out what that 60 minutes is all about, let's take a look at what that looks like. Let's go through the configuration of a crawler. Let's download that agent and take a look at what it looks like to turn that on and run it. And then let's jump in and look at the results that are coming back from an analysis standpoint. And then let's look at how that interfaces back to the user interface and what that looks like. So as we transition over to the user interface, we're going to go ahead and jump in. And the first thing we're going to do, as we saw in the steps, is we're going to configure a crawler or connector, we call them. So I'm going to go ahead and log in to the system here. And we're going to jump into the user interface. We'll explore some of this in a little bit in the demo, but I'm not going to kind of get too much into this right now. We're going to focus on the connector side. So we're going to quickly jump in. We're going to go to the admin screens, and we're going to click on external data. You'll see we have some connectors that are already pre-built here that we have. So we're going to add a new connector. All right, so we'll click add. From the connectors that are configured on this particular demo environment, we're going to choose the file system connector to configure because it's easy to interpret, but you can see some of the ones that are already turned on here. So Viva, SharePoint, document, and so forth. But we'll go ahead and pick file system, and we're going to give it a name. So we got to give it a name. So we'll say this is my first connector. Okay. We're going to decide, do we want to keep the native content or not? So we'll go ahead and check that. That'll keep a copy of it in our system. We're going to keep that in synchronous mode, meaning that whatever changes in the source system of the file share in this case, that it will automatically update in the index. So if a new file gets added or something gets deleted or whatever happens, that will be in a synchronized state versus an archive, which would be, I'm literally going to archive the data because I'm going to maybe decommission that application. We'll use the default. We're going to run 10 concurrent connections for processing. That's all has to do with speed. This can be bumped up depending on how robust your agent is, and we'll get into that in a second. But this is basically what you can bump that. But the default is 10, is quite fast. So we're going to be in what we call mixed mode for classification in this case. We've done past, and we'll do future webinars. We'll talk more about this, but this is really about the classification type. You can either use the default out of the box of Doxonomy, you can build your own and use only that, or you can run mixed, where it will look at both the pre-built Doxonomy classification types and the custom ones that you've added yourself. So it's a mix. So and we support that. We'll make this a full crawl versus a delta-based crawl. So we're going to actually do a full-time crawl. In this case, simplistically for webinar, we're just going to use the basic default everyone permissions. So that means everyone has access to the index. We can set up in the permissioning to control who can see what, and that's derived here at the crawling time. We're going to set up a schedule, so we're on the Eastern Seaboard here, so we're going to go ahead and choose Eastern Time, and we're going to run this daily. You could run it daily or every few minutes or once a month. It's all configurable, and in this case we'll start it every day at midnight. It'll basically run and the crawler will work. We're going to give it a path. I've pasted one here from my machine that I'm demoing from. So in this case, we're going to go from this demo server folder I set up with some files. Depth is going to be set to 0. By default, 0 means that it'll crawl really infinitely down the tree. So whatever folder structures and hierarchies that exist underneath that demo server folder that I've created here, it will navigate that when it's crawling. If I only wanted to go 1 level or 2 level or 3 level or 4 level deep, I can specify that here in depth, and then it would only go that far. And then of course I can choose to just keep everything, whatever it finds, or I can be selective. I can say, hey, I only want to get PDF files in this case, or maybe I want to get PDF files and Microsoft Word and maybe PowerPoint and so forth. So I can set this up, I can apply it to the system, and then I can save it. So we've now created a new connector. So that took less than 5 minutes, even with all of my talking. So you can see it's very easy to build new connectors in order to crawl. So now this connector is set up. It's a configuration file that's ready for an agent to connect to and take advantage of the data that's there and go and execute the rules that you've set within this file. No code, very easy, it's done. So now let's kind of move to the next stage. Let's look at the generation and creation of an agent. We click on the agent tab here and we'll see we have a couple of agents that are already created in this environment, but we're going to go ahead and add a new one. So very simple process. We click add. We're going to give that a name. So we're going to call it my first agent. We're going to give it a login credentials because it runs its own interface in order to access the components of the agent. So we'll just call this admin, and you can make that whatever you want. You'll set your password to the requirements. We'll go ahead and give this a password, and then we'll save it. As you can see, we created an agent. It was very easy. We can see it right here. Our first agent has been set up. The next step of this is just to download that agent, onto the machine. Now this could be deployed really on any environment. So it could be running on a Linux machine or on a Mac or on Windows. There's no constraints for that whatsoever. But we'll go ahead and we'll just download it right here for purposes of the webinar. So we'll see there that it's prepared itself, built it out unique for this environment, and now it is downloaded. We'll go ahead and say we want to keep that. So now we'll go ahead and right click on this and we'll run it so that we can start that agent up. So it's starting up and we now have the agent running. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like from the application. So we'll create a new tab in this case, and we'll type in localhost because it runs as a web service locally and on port 9090. So as you see, we'll get a login page here to the agent itself to interface with it. So that username admin and the password that we set for the agent is what's been configured for that. And we'll go ahead and log in. And we get this screen that gives us sort of the basic details around the status of the agent that's running. It's a running agent right now. Now the main thing around here, there's a few different access points on this that we can touch on. There's a configuration tab that tells us a little bit about network settings and where our logs are stored and all that kind of stuff. And you can restart the agent from here and so forth. But the main thing is to look at the connectors. So what we'll see here, there's that first connector that we created earlier. And all we really need to do to get this agent to be synced up with that connector is select it and add it. Asks if you want to do that and lets you know that it's been successfully added. And we'll see now that it's scheduled to run. So it'll pick up and run at the next run cycle, or I could choose to click run now and override that and force a run whenever I want. And then just click yes, and then it will actually execute the agent, run, and begin crawling that content. So very, very easy. Again, in less than 5 minutes, of course, even with all of my talking, we've created an agent, we've downloaded that agent, we've deployed that agent, and we've mapped it to the appropriate connector that we set up, and we turned it on, or we could have turned it on, and it begins to crawl and index the data. That's how easy it is to get up and running. Now, I'm going to cancel on this right now. Let's go ahead and let's jump to a different view now. Let's assume we've set this all up. It's running. Data is being indexed. Let's go now and take a look at what we can do with that data. What does that data begin to look like? And instead of going through our user interface, which is really kind of focused around search and configuration and all of that, let's approach it from the back end, more from the analysis side, the actual indexed data, the raw data on the back end. So let me go ahead and switch screens here. Okay, now that I've switched to a different screen, what we'll see here is a BI tool that is looking at the data that has been crawled from the Doxonomy system. And this is configurable. There's a lot of aspects around what you want to look at and how you want to get at that information. We also support multiple different BI tools. So for instance, if you're using a tool like Tableau or Spotfire or something like that, that's all totally fine as well to connect to the data source. So in this case, though, we're going to use the tool that we're using here, which is Kibana. So as you can see here, we've got quite a few data entry points here that we're working with. So it's a small subset, but it's about 383,000 rows here of data. We can see sort of that information, and you can navigate that and take a look at it in more detail. This is information that we'll be reporting on that has been automatically extracted and pulled out from Doxonomy from a crawler perspective and has been indexed. So let's jump into visualizations right away, because we really want to begin to visualize all this data. It's a lot of information. So how do we go about doing that? So we're going to set up a few different visualizations, and then we're going to drop those into a dashboard, and then we're going to interact with that dashboard and be able to jump back into content of where that data was derived. So let's create our first visualization here. In this case, we're going to open this up. We're going to create a simple pie chart. And in this case, we're going to point it to the index that we want to analyze on. We're going to go ahead and add a new bucket. So we're going to go ahead and slice that. We're going to base it on a term. And we're going to choose, in this case, we're going to sort by class. So we want to look at the different document classes, the different types of documents that we've collected. So from within here, we will create, actually we'll just type in class. So we'll choose the class keyword. We're going to do account based. We're going to, there's not more than 20 in this environment. So we'll go ahead and put in 20. We're going to have that sorting descending. We'll go ahead and update that. And immediately we'll see the data gets reflected from a class standpoint. So here is basically the counts of all of the meta value entries that have been indexed and picked up by the Doxonomy system, and it's sorting by the different classes. So we have some study protocols in here, informed consent, prescribing information, emails, 1572s, and so on. So this is just data that we've collected for demo purposes. So we've created our first chart. We're good with this chart. It's a good chart. So we're going to go ahead and hit save, and we're going to give that a name, and we're going to call this sort by class, and we will click save. So now we've created our first chart. So let's go ahead and go in and create another visualization. And in this case, we're going to create a visualization. We'll make this a bar chart. So we'll actually make it a horizontal bar. We'll choose that. We'll again select our index. And then we'll go ahead and create our first bucket. So we're going to split the series. So now we want to choose from the terms field, and we're going to go ahead and choose, in this case, the meta type keyword, which is going to give us basically a mapping to all of our entities. And we'll go ahead and enter 50. I don't think we have that many in there. We'll go ahead and leave that sorted by descending, and we're going to make that by count. So we'll go ahead and update this. That should give us an immediate view of all of our entity values that have been collected. And then there's some things here that we want to go ahead and filter out. So for purposes of this, we're going to go ahead and remove nouns and verbs. We'll go ahead and drop cardinal values. We're going to go ahead and let's see what else. Organization. We'll leave dates in there. We don't need quantities at this point. We leave pharmaceutical for sure. Places and active ingredients, yes. We're not looking at time. We'll want to leave products. We're not looking at money. So we can remove that. We're not looking for works of art. So let's remove those entities. We'll leave any legal terms. I don't think we need ordinals. I don't think that we need events. We're not looking for events. So we'll set that up as our main graph there. And we'll go ahead and save this. So let's go ahead and hit save. We'll give it a name, sort by entity. And hit save. So now we've created our next dashboard chart. So let's go ahead and jump back to the visualizations. So let's go ahead and click create our next visualization. In this case, let's go ahead and create a heat map. Again, we'll choose our index. And in this case, we're going to add the bucket, split on the x-axis. And again, we'll choose from terms. But here, we're going to focus on connector name. So let's go by the connector name, which will tie to our sources. So various different, whether it's Documentum or SharePoint or file servers and so forth. So we'll go ahead and do a count of those. We'll leave it set at 5. We'll leave that set by descending. However, in this case, we will go ahead and give it a custom label. So we're going to call that by source. And we'll go ahead and update this, and we should get an immediate update. So there we have it's sorted by the various different source types. So let's go ahead and save this visualization, and we'll give it a name. So we'll call this the source heat map visualization, and we will hit save. So we've created another visualization there. So let's go ahead and jump over and create our next two, and then we'll be done. So in this case, we're going to create a visualization, a tag cloud, so that we can identify all the various different entities that we've created and be able to visualize all of that. So let's go ahead and create our tag cloud. We're going to add a tag bucket. And we're going to map that to the term meta value. And we'll give it a custom label. We'll call this entities. And we'll go ahead and update that. Actually, let's increase that to, let's say, 100, the top 100. So that'll give us more. And again, we'll save this visualization to meta value tag cloud. All right, just give it a name and hit save. All right, and then we're going to create one more visualization. So let's go ahead and create a data table in this case. So we're going to create some buckets here to sort this on. So we'll split the row. And the first item, we're going to go by a term name. And in this case, we're going to go by the MID. And we'll give it a label of action. Okay. And then we're going to add another one. And in this case, we're going to make it a term value as well. And we're going to give that the original file name. And give it a label called file name. And then we're going to add another row. And again, that'll also be a term. And for that term, we're going to choose file extension, just so you can see that. And let's see, we'll give that a name of type. And last row, we'll go ahead and add another term value. And in this case, it's going to be the modified property, which will give us the date, the modified date that was collected. And let's go ahead and update that. So with that update, we're going to have our list. So let's go ahead and save that. And in this case, we're going to name it top 5 document list. Okay, and we click save. So we have now created, as we can see here, several visualizations very easily, very quickly. Now we just see how we can link these together into a simple dashboard that we can interact with and start to take a look at how we slice the data. So let's go ahead and go into the dashboard section. And in this case, we're going to create a new dashboard. And we'll go ahead and add our components. So let's go ahead and drop them in. So we'll go ahead and say we want to add our class. We want to add our entity map. We want to add our meta tag values. We want to add our source heat map and our document list. Okay, so we've now inserted all of those into our dashboard, and we can see the values right here. Let's go ahead and adjust this one over, and we'll stretch it to the full width. Maybe make it a little bit shorter right there. And that's our dashboard. So we'll go ahead and we'll save this as our life science dashboard. Okay. We've now created a dashboard that we can interact with against the data that has been analyzed and indexed. So let's take a look at this interaction and how this kind of works out. So as we look at the data, everything is automatically linked together just by the nature of the index. Okay, so let's say, for instance, we're going to focus in on this particular source. So in this case, it'll be the taxonomy source. So I'm going to filter to a particular crawler that crawled the data. So I've already now filtered down all the data across the different dashboard charts. And of course, I want to look at side effects. So let's go ahead and highlight side effects. So now I've identified the various different side effects, and maybe I want to further that to only prescribing information documents. So I'll go ahead and select prescribing information. So now what I see here is I see a sort of keywords across the various different documents that make up, where this data came from. And let's say I'm interested in nausea. So now I've been given a smaller subset of documents where this particular scenario of information is come up, and it's all dynamic. I've derived the decisions from this. And of course, we can slice this in so many different ways, but you can see how quickly and easily, from an analytics standpoint, how we can gain insight and interact with the raw data that was extracted automatically by Doxonomy just from enabling the system, turning on the crawler, and being able to access that information using our intelligence engine. So let's go ahead and open up this first one here. We can jump right to it. So I've been logged out because we've been out of the system for 20 minutes. Let's go ahead and log in, and it will jump us directly to that source document. So as we can see here, we're now in this document. We can filter on nausea, we can highlight that and jump right to the area within the document where that's found. If we wanted to view the source document, we can bring that up. You can see that is still here. We can, also see in which the depth that we crawl content. So we derived these attributes by understanding that that was a side effect, and the context of the wording around it, to make the decision that that was in fact a side effect that was mentioned in this particular document. So that piece of data came or was derived from unstructured data, just through the intelligence engine being able to read through that. You can see, as we talked about, how deep we crawl. So any of the images that were embedded in that document, they were crawled individually. For instance, here's a label document right here. Actually, here's the product label. That was extracted and pulled out of that PDF document and analyzed by itself. We can look at the OCR that was done on the actual text itself that's on the box. All that is automatically indexed, automatically part of the overall system, and allows you to be able to interact with it. So from the simplicity of the overall system, how quickly we can set it up and get it crawling, the insight in which we can slice and dice data from the back end from a BI type tool, right? Or directly to the search interface. For instance, if we wanted to go in and see the search interface, we can search for content as well, because all of that manifests itself into that being able to search just like you might Google, the weather, simplistically being able to search. So let's say I wanted to search on COPD related to cancer, search term, and just do a search. As you can see, the search comes back, and we have a list of documents that come back, various different, generic documents, study protocols, things of that nature. You can see this in this sort of document view, but the same sort of granularity around the insights, the ability to slice and view this data based on the search, the actual results of the search, we can visualize that right from within the UI. So we have the ability to look at that from a data perspective as opposed to a document perspective or a file perspective. We can also, sort and filter. So that same side effect we can see is loaded over here as a facet. And we could choose that, and we can further adjust dynamically, the subset of data right from here. All this is available at your fingertips, and is accessible within that less than an hour by getting the system up and running, configuring your connectors and crawlers with variation, of course, right? But you can do this all up and running without complexity, without a large project. It's easy and simple to get up, running, installed, and deployed, and bringing back this type of insight without any custom configuration or training or coding or anything like that. It can be delivered today as you see it, and everything that's here. Well, our goal today was to try to keep this under 45 minutes, and I think we've accomplished that. So we want to thank you very much for your time. We definitely would like to hear from you some more about what we're talking about. We will be reaching out to all of you each to schedule some time to have a deeper discussion around your needs and requirements and what you've learned from today's webinar. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. You can contact me via email or however you see fit. We really appreciate all of your time, and we thank you very much. And we'll send out a recording of this video for all of you as soon as it's ready to go. Thank you again, and have a great day.